presentation this afternoon. And this is a gentleman from Seattle again. We had to mix it up with Silicon Valley. And he has just completed a press conference. He's been an entrepreneur, an investor, philanthropic leader. Please welcome. And by the way, he was a little bit ill last night, but he got better today, and I'm happy he's here. Let's hear it for Naveen Jain. I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you. All right, so let's get going here, and let's talk about you. And then I can tell you about my life journey, but that's not as interesting as about you. I believe each one of you has potential to change people's lives. You just heard about what people do for themselves. I'm going to tell you, your life is not about what you have, but who you impact and how many people you impact. It's not about going out and say, what can you do for yourself? Or when you see a problem, you say, why doesn't somebody do something about it? You need to say, what is it that I can do about it? What can I do to make a difference? So I'm going to talk about a little bit about innovation and entrepreneurship. And I believe there is no problem large enough that can't be solved through innovation and entrepreneurship. You have to think differently to solve big problems. If you want to create a billion-dollar company, you can't be solving a million-dollar problem. You have to be solving big problems. And it so happens, many of the big problems happen to be social problems. Whether it happens to be the education, the healthcare, the clean water, the shortage of energy. Each one of these things, you can create a big industry around it. So doing well and doing good are not mutually exclusive. You can do well by doing good. If you want to solve the problem, you have to look at the world differently. So for example, if you want to solve the problem of education, you can't be thinking about building schools, you can't be thinking about training the teachers. Because that's an infrastructure problem, you cannot go do it in your lifetime. There are billions of people around the world who need help. How are you going to do that? You have to look at the problem and saying, it is not an infrastructure problem, it is actually a knowledge problem. Why is it a child who can solve the most complex problem in a video game struggles to do the basic things at the class? Because classes are not engaging. So I started spending last 2 years learning about brain, because my fundamental philosophy is you can apply the principles of neuroscience to reinvent education. And what I found really fascinating was, how does brain actually learn? And I thought I'm going to give you some of the learning that I had. I think you're going to find it very fascinating. So I found that brain is not optimized for reading. So let's all agree that irrespective of how much of a belief we have in God, that we were all a product of evolution. God just didn't drop us on one day and saying, here is the human beings. We evolved over centuries and millions of years we evolved. And the purpose of brain really was designed, the survivors, was primarily for, brain is designed for either survival or procreation. And the things that brain does well, because they were either required for one of these two things. When we were living in the jungles, nowhere it says, T-I-G-E-R coming, run. That means, guess what? We never had to learn to read to survive. But brain is very, very good at pattern matching. Even behind the bush, you see a yellow color with dots. What's the reaction? Get the hell out of there, I'm going to be somebody's lunch. You see a brown color with some stuff, and you say, oh, my lunch is running away from me, I need to go after it. So brain is very good at pattern matching. Brain is very good at sound, the smell, all the senses. If you are able to come up with the education system that takes a multi-sensory approach. But there's some very interesting thing about brain. Brain is designed never to ignore motion. Motion meant urgency. When something is moving, you have to act on it. That's the reason while I'm talking to you, you can tune out and start thinking about the most pretty girl, but when I move my hand, there is nothing you can do but to look at me. The emotion is something the brain cannot ignore. Interesting thing about, the couple of other interesting thing about brain that are very, very fundamental to education. Brain has this neurochemical called dopamine, and the word dope comes from that, right? It increases, actually releases the dopamine. How does the dopamine get released? Dopamine is a reward system. Most people used to think when you get the reward, the brain releases dopamine. But fundamentally what we learn now is brain releases the dopamine in anticipation of the reward, not the reward in itself. So let me give you an example. You're sitting in a nice bar and you see a beautiful girl across the table. You smile at her, she smiles back. Your brain says, You smile at her again and she smiles back, and you're thinking, Now brain is trying to, in anticipation of the reward, brain releases a set of dopamine. Now you go, you have become bold, and now you go introduce yourself. Now when you're talking to her, the second thing happens. If you feel you're getting closer to the reward, brain gives you the second dose of dopamine. If you're talking to her and she snubs you, you're done. And you're still thinking, oh my gosh, she's really being nice, I think there's a reward at the end of the thing. Brain releases the second set of dopamine. And the third set of dopamine gets released when you actually get the reward, right? All right. So the point is, how do we involve that system into education? The children have to feel there is anticipation of the reward, and when they go take action towards that reward and they feel they're making progress, the brain releases dopamine. That means we have to, if you want to make education addictive, you have to let children know that there is a reward and they are getting closer and closer to the reward as they're taking action. Today we have a system, what we call fixed time variable learning, which is we all have 1 year to pass the 8th grade. Some people who learn more, they get A. Some people learn little, they get B. Some people learn nothing and they get D. But guess what? Everybody moves to the next grade. Wouldn't it be nice, instead of fixed time variable learning, we are able to have a fixed learning variable time, just like a video game. You can't go to level 2 until you master the level 1. What if every education system is designed that says, until you master the subject, whether it takes you 3 hours, 3 days, 3 months, 3 years, until you master the subject, you're not moving on. You can learn at your own pace. What if the learning becomes adaptive? That means most people, remember, they learn very differently. Learning is all about, based on your previous experience, what have you learned? Some people learn conceptually. Some people learn graphically. Some people learn experimentally. Can you adapt education so that you learn, the education adapts to your way of learning? That's called adaptive learning. So now, coming back to you, before I go back and start giving you the solution, what we can do in this room today, think about what an entrepreneur is. Let me give you a definition of an entrepreneur here. Most people think of an entrepreneur as somebody who starts a company. That's not an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is a state of mind. When you see a problem, when you think of a solution and you go out and do something about it, then you're an entrepreneur. Whether you're sitting at home, whether you're working for a large company, you are a problem solver. A person who sees the problem is a human being. Person who finds a solution is a visionary. Person who executes on the solution is an entrepreneur. So we are all problem solvers. The beauty of us Indians is really simple. We are an entrepreneur because every single day in our life, we see nothing but challenges and problems, and we solve every one of them. It doesn't matter whether it's corruption, it doesn't matter it's traffic, we find the way around it. We are born entrepreneurs. There is no country in the world that has better mindset about entrepreneurs than India. Then why, as a country, we are not thriving on entrepreneurship? And the only reason is because we haven't figured out how we can work together and create our own ecosystem. Today we feel if one person is going ahead, it's at the expense of us. The minute we can create a society where we are all entrepreneurs come together, we can help each other. We not only learn from each other's learning, we can also help each other distribute the product. And we can find the complementary things that we can all benefit from. We find the successful people who have been very successful in life are willing to come in there, help you guide, mentor, and provide the seed funding. At the end of the day, we as a society have to learn to look at our own obligations. So this is probably a time I'm going to step back for a second and give you my life journey. I grew up in parts of India where, in fact, we have no place we called home. We never could live in any place for more than 6 to 9 months. We grew up very, very poor, and that's a story of most of us here in India. I mean, it's not we are rich, a lot of us are rich people. But we were particularly very poor people. And we didn't have to be poor. My father worked in the public works department. His job was to he was an overseer, building the buildings and the roads. And he decided that he wants to be an honest man. He's just not going to take the bribe from a contractor. He's going to have to use the cement, not the sand, and give him the bribe. The problem was, if you don't take the bribe, it is not that you don't have money. That's an easy problem to solve because very few people die from starvation. The problem was, his bosses didn't get the money. If he wasn't taking the money, his boss won't get the money. And guess what happens? Bosses say, why the money is not coming in? Well, that SOB is not taking the money. Guess what? Transfer him. And we got transferred every 6 months. And we went to the most rural areas. The places where there were no schools, there were nothing. We sat on the floor, we learned, wrote on the floor, and we learned. Despite all those challenges, my sister went on to do a postdoctorate in applied mathematics. My brother went on to do a PhD in computer science and PhD in statistics. And I was the least educated person with an engineering degree and an MBA. We went to US with $5 in my pocket with a simple dream. I was going to be a person who's going to be able to come back and someday make a tremendous difference in people's lives. God has been very kind to us. And I feel at this point, I'm simply a trustee of God's kindness. I was born with nothing and I'm going to die with nothing. In between, I'm simply a trustee of his kindness. And the resources that he gave me, the knowledge he gave me, the skills he gave me, I'm going to utilize every one of it to see if I can make a difference in hundreds of millions of people's life, if not billions of people's life. And that's what drives me. Now, in some sense, on a personal note, it's very challenging. We have 3 children. And we always thought about, my wife and I thought about, should we just live in a very small house and tell them we have no money so they can grow up to be wonderful people. And I realized but dishonesty is not how you create values amongst your children. You want them to know we have plenty of money, but what is their self-worth? Their self-worth is not what they have. Their self-worth is going to be determined by what they create. Once you create that value that each child, their value is not the Lamborghini they're going to drive, it is about how many people's lives they're going to be able to impact. The success is not the amount of money you have in your bank. Success is the number of people whose lives you can touch and have a positive impact on. And that is what we taught them. Our son, when he was 10 years old, I was running a company called InfoSpace. We were at the peak. I mean, in the Fortune 400, my net worth is, billions and billions, 7, 8, $10 billion. Who's counting, right? Right. One day he walked up to me and said, Dad, I'm going to make more money than you ever did. I could have easily said, good luck, son, right? But I didn't. What I told him, I sat him down. I said, Uncle, I'm surprised you think of success like that. I will be so proud of you if you're able to impact more people in a positive way than I was able to do. You know what he said to me? Whatever, Dad. Walked out. But guess what? 16-year-old goes to Wharton, calls me one day and says, Dad, I have an idea. And I said, what is it? He said, Dad, what if I can bring all the entrepreneurs from colleges? What they lack is they are brilliant entrepreneurs. What they lack is the mentorship. You provided me the exposure. You provided me the mentorship. What if I'm able to provide all of these young entrepreneurs who are brilliant from middle-class family and never been exposed? If I'm able to do that, I can impact millions of people's life. And that's how I'm going to make you proud. And he did that. 16-year-old child decided that's what he wants to do. He hosts a summit in New York Stock Exchange. I didn't even think that was possible, that he will be able to take a New York Stock Exchange and bring all these entrepreneurs together. Same thing our daughter. Our daughter at 16-year-old, she just turned 17, started a nonprofit called I Care, We Care. How do we bring the youth of the world together to care about something? It doesn't matter what you care about, but if you care about something, the world will be a better place. And if you can find a group of people who are able to come together about the same cause, you can make a difference. So if my message is really simple, each one of you should go out not worry about what's in it for me. What can I do to make a difference in people's lives? What can I do to go be a successful person who touches every person who I touch, I do some positive impact in their life. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have money to do that. It is a way of thinking. For some reasons, I find that even in the United States, the Indians just don't give. The only place they give is to the temples or to religious causes. It is just not in our nature to feel that we have an obligation to the society. Nobody can ever be successful in life without taking so much from the society. And it's not just your responsibility, it's your obligation to do that. Right? So coming back to my now innovation and entrepreneurship. We talked a little bit about education. Now look at healthcare. The healthcare, again, is an infrastructure problem that revolves around the doctors and the hospitals, but really is a knowledge problem. What if you're able to develop a software and the sensors that can work on a $35 tablet that can be used by a village girl to be able to diagnose the diseases better than the doctor? It changes the world. Think about what the pregnancy test did for women. What if we had the sensor, the test on a stick, the lab on the chip that you'll be able to spit on or just touch your sweat and it's be able to diagnose whether you have a dengue fever, whether you have malaria or any other infectious disease. You will only go to see a doctor or the hospital unless you have something very acute or something rare. The most common diseases can be diagnosed simply by the sensors and the software. So think, because somehow then use a fossil fuel. As opposed to conservation, what if we all thought about creation? What if we can create the abundance of energy so you never have to worry about it? With that abundance of energy, the world changes. If you have abundance of energy, you can have a clean water because you can always use the energy to desalinize the salt water, and you have more clean water than you can ever use. So in life, if you want to solve problems, you have to think differently. Never ask an expert how to solve a problem. Expert can only provide what I say incremental evolution. But if you want a disruptive innovation, ask the people who have nothing to do with your industry. In fact, rarely a disruption comes from inside the industry. Most disruption comes from outside the industry. People who have nothing to do with it. In the last session, Vivek talked about how a simple $1 million prize was able to come up with a solution to clean the oil spill. And that solution actually came from a tattoo parlor guy and a dentist, not from some big oil company. Big oil companies spent $20 billion trying to figure out how to do it. And this guy's $1 million prize, they went and found a solution that was 5 times more effective. So always be thinking innovatively and always be thinking about how you can go out and help solve the problem. And as I said before, there is no problem that's large enough that the innovation and entrepreneurship can solve. To be a successful entrepreneur in life, there are very few things you need. It is really not, the only reason we are scared of being an entrepreneur is because we don't have the knowledge. It is no different than why are we scared being in a dark alley. In a dark alley, we don't know what's coming there and we are scared. And if we have a flashlight or the alley is lit, we are not scared. And that is simply the knowledge and the experience. And if the people who have been before you can provide you with the knowledge and experience, that becomes your flashlight and you're no longer scared because you can see everything that's coming. Being an entrepreneur is the least risky thing you can do. In fact, if you're controlling your own destiny as opposed to some other monkey controlling your destiny, tell me, how can you possibly think there's a risk in that? You know what drives you, what makes you tick. There is nothing that you want to control when you control on your destiny, you can't achieve. It requires passion. You have to really believe in what you're doing despite what other people tell you. You have to learn to enjoy the journey. It is not about the end goal, it is about enjoying the journey. In some sense, being an entrepreneur is like having sex. Enjoy the process and don't focus on the end goal. Right? It is about building a team that is unlike you. Our human nature is to find people who are like us. We always want to find people who are just like us. But when you're creating a company, you want to find people who are complementary to you. If you have a skill, but you don't know, you don't have a good, I guess you don't enjoy doing detail work, then find somebody who enjoys doing the detail work. And you find people who are complementary. And I can give you a few more advice, but the last advice is focus. Most companies die from indigestion rather than starvation. What I mean by that is when you try to do too many things rather than too few things. As an entrepreneur, you see opportunities where others sees none. But guess what happens? You always see more opportunity. You're always bouncing from one thing to another. But if you want to be successful in life, focus and try to do few things and do them well, as opposed to trying to do lots of things. With that, I think about 8.5 minutes left, and I thought let's at least do some Q&A and see if you have any questions. Well, it's a 30-second rule. If you don't ask me a question, I'm a step. Okay.
You were mentioning neuroscience, and you were going to say something about it.
Yeah. So, I could spend more time on the neuroscience, but, ultimately, the brain processes information, and it's good at very many things, but it's not good at other things. And if you want to reinvent education and how you really will enjoy learning about how brain works. And if you guys are interested in neuroscience, I can recommend some of the books that I absolutely enjoyed reading. A book called Incognito by David Eagleman. And there's another good book called Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. And I think there's a book called Brain Rules by a guy named John Medina from University of Washington. And you'll really enjoy reading those books. The three books, one is Brain Rules by John Medina, Incognito by a guy named David Eagleman out of Baylor, and Brain That Changes Itself is about neuroplasticity. This is by a guy named Norman Doidge from Columbia. But I think there's some very, very interesting concepts you will learn there.
You talked about the need for us to kind of create an ecosystem and help each other.
Yeah.
To make things more successful or make them better. Can you talk about 3 specific suggestions you would make for us?
So one thing is to find in a local community of entrepreneurs where you come down together and are able to freely discuss your own problems and see have they faced the same problem and how do you solve that. And I do that, by the way, even to date. I meet with the CEOs of the largest company. I will go, so first of all, I don't buy any stock, I don't sell any stock. So that really gives me a freedom to be able to talk about things that I'm talking to them. So right across me is the CEO of Expedia. We just meet and he tells me, look, Naveen, I'm struggling with this, what would you do? And I said, this is what I would do. I have no vested interest, but he can now ask me the question that he will never ask even his executive team, because every decision he makes impacts his executive team. So you're able to learn from your own, each other, and then bring in the people who are experienced, who are able to not give you a lecture, because that's what we in India are very good at. We're good at lecturing people, right? Idea is to be able to come sit down and listen about what is it they need help on, not about what I want to talk about, how great I am. And that's what we do. We spend most of our time talking about how great I am, as opposed to let me help you and see what I know about your problem. So I would start with building the things together, finding the mentorship. And the third thing really is finding the other people, even the other parts of the world. And I don't know if Jonathan is here or not. Jonathan is back there. So Jonathan actually has a great company that's doing some amazing stuff. I mean, he's a white guy, but his job is to find the great technology in India and take them to US and help market the things in US. Think about that, as opposed to bringing this stuff from US to India. He's taking what is already working in India and take it and help you market in US. And that allows you to create another big place, because there are a lot of people with a lot of money, right? And if you can market your products and services in US, that will help a lot. So go find him if you can at the end. Yeah.
Do you think that India should focus on one or two things, and you talk about focus? The software industry, product industry itself should focus on one or two things, like Israel focused on security technology and became a world leader. Is there something like that, like mobile or something?
No.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, the question is really, should India, all Indian entrepreneurs focus on one particular thing, like Israel focused on security? When I talked about focus, I talked about each individual, not as a country. As I don't think we can say India is going to be expert somehow in security or mobile system. I think each one of us as an entrepreneur have to find our own passion. What makes us tick? What gets up in the morning? I work harder than ever now, than I've ever done. Because every time I go to bed tired, I always think about why am I doing it? And I wake up in the morning, I know why. So find that cause, find that calling. What is it that makes you tick? What is it that you want to do in life? If you can find that calling, you will know, you'll build a great business.
Naveen, I wanted to ask a question.
Please.
I know you're involved with some really spacey stuff. Can you talk a little bit about XPRIZE, space, some of that, thinking outside the box?
So I think what MR is referring to is that I'm on the board of XPRIZE Foundation, where we use incentive prizes to solve big problems. I'm also on the board of Singularity University, where we are always looking at exponentially growing technology. In exponentially growing technology, in the early days of exponential curve, even though it's doubling, but when you're small, it looks very, very flat. Until you hit the knee of the exponential curve, then you suddenly go out and change the world. So if you can find that inflection point 1 or 2 years ahead, then you are able to put the infrastructure and a solution together. So rather than using the technology that exists today, find what is going to be out there in the next 2 years and build a solution around what is going to be, not what exists today. And I strongly advise, if you guys are interested in that, go to YouTube and look for Singularity University. You will find information on nanotechnology. You'll find information on genetics. You'll find information on healthcare, what kind of devices that are coming in today that are constantly monitoring from your, when you go sit on a commode to when you're looking at the mirror. And look for the things by Dr. Daniel Kraft, wonderful man, a good friend. Andrew Hassel on synthetic biology, Ralph Merkel on nanotechnology, and you'll find some great stuff. So go check it out, and the beauty I find about Singularity University is it changed my life. There is no problem I see that's big enough that I can't solve. And in fact, I took my daughter, who had zero interest in science. And I still have 1 minute here, so I can give you a small bit of story here. My daughter came to me last year, she was 16 years old, and said, Dad, I know you love science. I want nothing to do with science, so just get used to it. You know how 16 years old talk. And I said, Dad, I still call her my doll. I said, doll, the dad has job to do. And she asked me, what's dad's job? I said, dad's job is to expose you to everything before you make up your mind. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to Singularity University. I want you to learn about artificial intelligence, about the neuroscience, about the genetics, and about the synthetic biology, and about the space exploration. She looks at me and said, Dad, you just don't listen. Didn't I just tell you I want nothing to do with science? So I said, doll, here's what we're going to do. You promise me you're going to go with an open mind and learn about this, and you go there for 3 weeks, and when you come back, whatever you decide, I will support it, because then I have done my job of making sure you know everything that you need to know. She decides she asked me if I promised if I'm going to follow up on my words. I say I do. And she decides to go there for 3 weeks. She came back, and she tells me, Dad, I made up my mind now. And I'm thinking, oh my God. Right? She comes back and says, Dad, I've decided I'm going to be either a neuroscientist or geneticist. Right? And I asked her, what happened, doll? I thought you didn't like science. She said, I didn't know anything about these things, so how could I like them? Right? So the point is, the fact in the Indian entrepreneurs, they're not thinking big, they're not thinking innovatively, is simply because they're not being exposed to it. All we have to do is find ourselves to expose to all of the things that are happening, all these exponentially growing technology, and saying, why can't we bring helium-3 from moon? So I started a company called Moon Express. People thought I was crazy. Now we have a moon lander that's actually flying autonomously using the Star Wars technology on micropropulsion and micro radar to be able to go to the moon, not only take the stuff from Earth to moon, but also bring helium-3 and platinum down to the Earth to be able to solve the big problems of our energy. So think big. There's nothing that you can't do. If a guy who was poor and hungry in India can do this, there's nothing that you can't do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Naveen. Hey, Naveen.
Uh-oh.
We got something to give you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
What a
much.
pleasure.
It was inspiration.
Thanks.